I'm Joe Gigliotti, PhD, and I am your guide for this journey you are about to embark on. Now, to survive here in this generation, you're going to have to know a few things. Come along for the ride. I will show you how to live. Welcome to the latest edition of How to Live. I'm your educator and teacher, professor, PhD as well, Joe Gigliotti. I thank you for tuning in. Today's episode is all about how to survive. Sometimes the world is not an easy place, sometimes it isn't fair, but you can survive in it. And our first lesson of the day in this How to Survive episode is an L letter, an L combination term. Sometimes life will throw things at you, and sometimes you won't know what to expect, but that's why today's lesson is teaching you how to live and learn. Live and learn.
Children come and go in this hospital every day. The following scenes show some of the most common accidents that happen to kids. Because they did first and thought last, they ended up in an ambulance like the one here. And here are some facts not very many people know. More children are crippled or killed by accidents in their home or neighborhood than all the diseases like polio, TB, and heart trouble put together. Tell that to your mom and dad tonight. They'll really be surprised. For instance, we know that every boy and girl should know how to swim. Uh-oh, that girl wants to have some fun. Looks like she's telling her friend to jump on Johnny when he comes up from his dive. Yep, that's what she told him to do, all right. That's a good trick. It worked out just like she planned. Wait a minute, something's wrong with Johnny. Of course, tricks don't always turn out as we think they will. Like this one, for instance. Lucky for Johnny that Pete knew enough to drag him out of the pool and give him artificial respiration at once. Had they waited until they got to the hospital to do it, like this poor boy, it would have been too late. The trick almost had an unhappy ending. Another bad thing to fool around with is fire, as you all know. A campfire can be a lot of fun, but it can also be very dangerous. But Bill just isn't thinking about danger. It sure makes you mad when you try and still can't get a blaze started. It seems that David here has a good idea. Probably some more matches. Although if he hasn't started it by now, if that's gas in that can, he's going to be awfully sorry. Maybe one of his pals will stop him from throwing that gas on the fire. No, no one said a word. They're too busy concentrating on the fire to think about what might happen. And did happen. So, another bad accident. It doesn't always take gasoline to make fire dangerous. With know-how, you can burn fires. With carelessness, fires will burn you. Here's another cause for accidents happening while you're playing. For instance, this looks simple, doesn't it? And it was, until one of the boys decided to jump. Whoops, there he goes. He still seems to be in one piece. He said it was easy, nothing to it. Tells his friend to jump. But this boy isn't so sure. Come on, Mike, don't be afraid. Jump. It's not high. So Mike, not wanting to appear afraid, takes a deep breath and jumps. Unfortunately, he landed the wrong way. His friend is very sorry, but being sorry won't mend a broken leg. So the hospital gets another patient. Jumping from high places isn't smart, and pushing somebody when he doesn't expect it can be very dangerous. Walking on picket fences, climbing around old buildings may be fun, but it can also put boys and girls in the hospital, and that isn't so much fun. Here's something else to look out for. Playing in the streets. Ball games are fun, but they should also be safe. That's what playgrounds and schoolyards are for. For if he keeps his eye on the ball, he can't look out for traffic too. Neither a friend's warning nor the car's brakes prevented an accident or saved this boy. And again, the ambulance brings in the victim of an accident that never should have happened. Bob and Ed went canoeing at the lake one afternoon. It was a lovely day, peaceful and quiet, perfect for boating. Too quiet for Ed, I guess, because all of a sudden, he shouted to Bob to look at something on the shore. Bob did something no one should ever do, stand up in a canoe. This gave Ed a chance to start rocking the canoe and scare poor Bob. But once again, what started out as an innocent joke ended up in something more serious. It's a good thing Ed remembered what he'd learned in the Boy Scouts and threw Bob a safety seat in time to prevent a drowning. Guns cause some of the worst accidents and the most tragic, blindness. Such a gun is not only illegal for boys in most cities, but is a possible killer and crippler in their hands. He's a good shot, but look what happened. It's very easy to put out an eye with a BB gun or with pieces of flying glass, as happened in this case. Is it worth this, boys and girls? Supposing this were you. Just getting a half look at the world because someone didn't know how to use a gun safely. Now take the case of this young lady, cutting out paper dolls in the safety of her own home. Doesn't seem possible an accident could happen here, does it? When she heard her father at the door, she got excited. She'd just have time to hide behind the door and surprise him, like she did every night. She jumped to her feet. This time it was different. She tripped and fell on the scissors. And the doctor has another patch-up job to do. It's always dangerous to run with scissors or any other sharp, pointed object in the hand. It's also dangerous to climb on anything while holding scissors. If you fell, you could cut yourself or poke out an eye. Now, how could anything possibly happen to these boys? Let's go out to the edge of the cliff. His friends know better. But Nick feels like exploring. He doesn't stop to think that the fence was put up for a reason. No, Nick doesn't stop to think until it's too late. The boy learned what fences were for the hard way, and he's not out of trouble yet. But lucky for Nick, he's not alone. One of his friends goes for help. And comes back with the best friend a kid could have when trouble occurs, a policeman. The officer goes into action fast. And the job of rescue begins. That's another thing to remember, boys and girls. Whenever you get into real trouble, go to your nearest police officer or sheriff. You'll find him a real friend in need. See how the officer questions Nick to make sure he's not hurt any place but his wrist before he carries him up the rope. He's learned his lesson and was lucky not to have been hurt more than he was. You youngsters can save yourselves a lot of pain if you just stop and think. Listen to the advice of your parents and teachers. A hospital bed isn't anywhere near as nice as your bed at home. A bone that is broken in too many places may keep you from ever playing ball again. Maybe figures don't mean much to you, but listen, try to understand, because it's your life I'm talking about. More than 12,500 kids die every year. More than 50,000 of them are permanently crippled every year. More than 1,500,000 children are seriously injured every year. And all of these accidents happen in your own home, your own neighborhood. So be careful, kids. Too many youngsters end up in the hospital. Why don't you stay out of it? Live and learn, because you are the America of tomorrow.
Welcome back. Now that you've learned all about how to live and learn, it's time for our next lesson here in how to survive. And that next lesson, sometimes there's bad particles floating around the world that you want to avoid. So this next lesson is all about bacteria. Bacteria.
Ted Jones is visiting one of the laboratories at the City Health Department. His brother Frank has recently taken a position as a bacteriologist with the department. Ted seems to be having a little trouble.
Can't you get it focused on the field, Ted? Try using the fine adjustment knob. And do it more slowly. You're likely to miss the cells you're looking for, even though they may be there.
Okay, I'm trying. Say, here they are. Here, look.
Good. You know what kind they are?
No. All I know is that they came out of that test tube that you gave me.
Then they're one of the kinds of bacteria that cause food to spoil.
Ted has just seen one of the many kinds of bacteria. Bacteria are found almost everywhere in our environment. Some float around in the air. Some are in water or other liquids. Still others thrive in the soil. Bacteria are plants, but they are not green like the plants we usually see. Some kinds are indispensable. For example, countless bacteria are at work in this clover field. They are growing in the little nodules at the plant roots. Bacteria in these nodules take nitrogen from the air and change it into a form of plant food. Other kinds of bacteria are responsible for milk or cream becoming sour, the development of flavor and other qualities in cheese, and the disintegration of dead plants and animals. In fact, the effects of bacteria are so important that life as we know it would be impossible without them. Most bacteria are friends of man. Some even produce chemicals called antibiotics that are used to help fight different diseases. Only a few kinds of bacteria cause disease. Probably the first person to observe bacteria was Anton van Leeuwenhoek, inventor of one of the first successful microscopes. After looking through his crude microscope, he made drawings of the microorganisms he saw. These represented organisms from tartar scraped from his own teeth. In contrast, here, using a modern microscope, we see other microorganisms taken from tartar. After the time of Leeuwenhoek, generations were to pass before another achievement of great importance would be made in the study of bacteria. It was the famed chemist Louis Pasteur of France who in the 1850s proved that bacteria cause fermentation. This explained many of the chemical changes that go on in nature. Pasteur also proved that bacteria never develop out of dead organic matter alone, as some people had believed. He emphasized that bacteria can only come from other bacteria. Soon afterward, it was found that bacteria can spread disease from a sick animal to a healthy animal. But this discovery was made by Koch, a German contemporary of Pasteur. This discovery is the basis of the germ theory of disease. Robert Koch and his assistants also learned to prepare and use nutrient materials. Nutrient materials are usually jelly-like emulsions or fluids, which favor the growth of bacteria. Koch made other discoveries that helped lay the foundations of modern bacteriology. Since the time of Koch, much has been learned and many other kinds of bacteria discovered. Today, if Ted could collect all known kinds of bacteria, he would have thousands, and the facts that have been discovered about them are exceedingly numerous. He wonders how a beginner can ever learn about so many kinds of bacteria. Frank explains that it takes a systematic approach. For example, bacteria may be separated into groups according to what they live upon, the nature of the food they require. Some bacteria are parasites, others saprophytes, and still others autotrophs. Parasites depend upon living plants or animals for food. Here are some parasitic bacteria. Most bacteria that cause human disease are parasitic. Saprophytes live upon dead plants or animals or their products. Saprophytic bacteria produce enzymes that cause the chemical breakdown we call decay. There are more kinds of saprophytic bacteria than of any other type. Autotrophs get their energy from minerals or other inorganic materials. The autotrophic bacteria seen here live upon a form of iron. Through oxidation, they change one form of iron into another and use the energy that is released. Unlike the large majority of plants, most bacteria have no chlorophyll with which to manufacture food. Parasites, saprophytes, and autotrophs all take in food through their cell walls. To pass through these cell walls, the food must be soluble. In some instances, insoluble foods are converted into soluble materials by chemicals released by the bacteria themselves. All bacteria require soluble food to live. Ted thinks the information seems complicated, but Frank, speaking from experience, explains that the basic facts about bacteria are quite simple and very useful. Besides facts about the food getting of bacteria, Frank describes another type of information that is especially useful in bacteriology. Depending upon the structure or shape of bacteria, there are 4 main kinds. The cocci, that are round like these, that are common in the air. The bacilli, that are rod-shaped like these from gas gangrene. The spirilla, that are spiral like these taken from a sample of well water. And the filamentous forms, such as these thread-like ones. Structure or shape is one of the principal characteristics used by bacteriologists to classify or identify different kinds of bacteria. The life processes of bacteria are simple. We've already seen how bacteria obtain food. Now we will consider their reproduction, which takes place through simple division of the cells. In drawings, we can see that bacterium cells are continually growing. When a cell reaches maturity, it divides again. This goes on and on about every half hour, as long as the food supply holds out, or until some unfavorable condition slows down or stops their development. The reproduction rate of bacteria may be greatly affected by temperature. In a laboratory, the temperature can be controlled in an electric incubator. As Frank explains, there's always a temperature that's best for growing bacteria. Usually, this temperature is about 30 to 37 degrees centigrade. 37 degrees centigrade is about equal to the normal human body temperature. In case the temperature is unfavorable, some bacteria, especially the rod-like kinds, have a special means of protecting themselves. They do it by forming spores. Notice the spore forming in the center of one of these bacterium cells. Some other kinds of bacteria form spores at the ends of the rods instead of at the centers. Either way, a spore has a special wall around itself that seems to protect the bacterium inside from such adverse conditions as cold, heat, sunlight, or disinfectant. Later, when conditions improve, the spore may change back again into the rod-like bacterium. Not many disease-producing bacteria go through a spore form. Besides protective mechanisms, some bacteria are equipped to move about. The hair or whip-like parts attached to these bacterium cells are called flagella. Different types of bacteria have different types of flagella. Such flagella can be moved to propel a living bacterium through blood or other solutions. Not all bacteria have such means of locomotion. Since the time of Leeuwenhoek, progress in bacteriology has been phenomenal. His successors, such as Pasteur of France and Koch of Germany, have made discoveries and invented techniques indispensable in successfully preparing nutrient materials, growing cultures, and subjecting the cultures to tests that help identify and classify bacteria. Today, in bacteriology laboratories, work is conducted that leads to the control of the relatively few bacteria that are foes of mankind, and to the more effective use of the multitudes that are friends, in order to make human life more healthful and increase our standard of living.
Hello and welcome back. So as you learned in that lesson, bacteria isn't always scary. It can be a friend as well. So our next lesson here, however, isn't friendly and really something you should avoid. Our next lesson is all about the human body and what effect that tobacco can have on it. Tobacco.
When Columbus sent his companion, Miguel de Torre,
to explore the interior of the newly discovered continent, he returned with the report that he had seen natives who sat before burning pieces of wood upon which they placed dried leaves and then inhaled the smoke through tubes inserted in their nostrils. This was the first acquaintance of white men with tobacco. The fragrant leaves of the Indians quickly spread around the world. Today, the labor and skill of thousands of families goes into the growing and processing of tobacco. Tobacco plants grow on millions of acres of fertile soil, soil that might otherwise be used to produce food. From cured tobacco leaves, such generally known products as snuff, chewing tobacco, pipe tobacco, cigars, and cigarettes are made. More stores sell tobacco than bread, and money spent on tobacco could pay for half our schools. This then is an example of a product that represents one of America's largest farm crops and one of the most controversial consumer articles. What does this product contain, and how does it affect those who use it? What tobacco smoke contains is simple to determine. Here is a scientifically designed apparatus for collecting the content of the smoke under controlled conditions. Smoking is a process of dry distillation. By dry distillation, we mean the transformation of dry substances into vapor. All the products normally inhaled by a smoker are in these bottle traps filled with liquids. Supplementary traps called bubblers catch any substances not collected in the flasks. The liquid in 2 of the flasks absorbs the nicotine, and in the other 2 flasks, it collects the tarry substances out of the burning tobacco. From the first group of flasks, chemists isolate nicotine by distillation. The amount of nicotine obtained in this process is, of course, small and can only be measured by very delicate instruments. The ultraviolet spectrophotometer, for instance, is often used to measure minute amounts of nicotine. Different cigarettes, even of the same brand, sometimes vary in weight and quantity of nicotine. Variations from 1 to 3 milligrams per cigarette have been recorded. 1 milligram is about this much, and 3 times this amount could cause nicotine poisoning. The liquid in the second pair of flasks contains tars. It is first diluted with water, then chloroform is added. The chloroform dissolves the tars from the solution. Since chloroform and water do not mix, the chloroform mixture separates from the water as soon as the shaking stops. Finally, chloroform is evaporated out of the mixture by boiling, leaving the tars behind in the measuring cup. Cigarette tars consist of a variety of substances which can be further separated chemically. Here are some of the more important constituents of cigarette tars. Some may be considered irritants, others stimulants, and some as having no known effect upon the human organism. All smoke, including cigarette smoke, contains some carbon monoxide, a poisonous gas that combines readily with the hemoglobin of the red blood cells and prevents it from absorbing oxygen in the lungs and giving it off to the tissues. Very little is known about how much harm carbon monoxide from smoking does. All these tarry substances are the products of burning. They are not in the green tobacco leaves. But unlike tars, nicotine is found in the unburned tobacco. In smoking, some of the nicotine enters the body. When we light a cigarette, about 25% of the nicotine is destroyed chemically by fire. Behind the glowing tip, in the zone where tobacco is heated to a medium temperature, gases containing nicotine arise from the leaves. About 30% of these gases pass out into the atmosphere, while the remaining 45% continue to flow with the main air current towards the mouth. However, the major portion of the nicotine does not reach the mouth. It is deposited on the cold tobacco particles which it passes on the way. In consequence, only some 15% of the total quantity of nicotine enters the mouth. Nicotine enters the body primarily through the air passages and lungs. However, some nicotine is dissolved in the saliva of the mouth and swallowed, thus reaching the stomach directly. From the stomach, the portal vein carries it to the liver, where some chemical changes occur which are not yet fully understood. But most of the nicotine enters the lungs with the inhaled air. From the lungs, it is carried to the left side of the heart, and from there it is rapidly distributed to all tissues of the body. This is why the smoker feels the effects of smoking almost as soon as he lights the tobacco. Carried by the blood, nicotine reaches the nerve cells, where it induces a complex set of reactions. The drug acts mainly on three parts of the nervous system: on the ganglia, or switchboards, of the autonomic nervous system, on the junction between nerves and the muscle, and on the brain itself. At these points, nicotine first stimulates the nerve cells, then gradually slows down functions and even paralyzes them. As a consequence, many types of reactions may go on at different rates and at different places in the body simultaneously, producing involved and often unpredictable effects which vary with each individual. Animal experiments enable us to observe the action of massive doses of nicotine. Note the blood vessels in this rabbit's ear. An injection of nicotine affects the rabbit's blood vessels dramatically. Watch how the small arteries in the rabbit's ear gradually disappear as the blood vessels tighten up under the stimulating action of nicotine. In this experimental setup, effects of nicotine from smoking can be measured with special instruments. Although the smoker absorbs relatively small amounts of nicotine, sensitive instruments can record its effect. For instance, these thermocouples record the influence of nicotine upon the body temperature. In this experiment, we see that the skin temperature gradually drops from point 80 on the graph to about 65, or 15 points. The skin temperature drops because blood vessels constrict under the influence of nicotine, and less blood reaches the skin. Experiments with animals help dramatize the effect of nicotine on the nerve cells of the heart. By applying the drug directly to the exposed nerve of a rabbit's heart, we induce a change in rhythm. To understand better what is happening, let us look at a schematic drawing. In the experiment, nicotine was applied at the spot indicated by the arrow. And this is one nerve cell called a ganglion cell. Nicotine first stimulates the nerve cells, then it paralyzes them. See how the rabbit's heart first beats slower, then speeds up as the nicotine stimulates and subsequently paralyzes the nerve cells of the heart. In the observation chamber, the research scientists simultaneously the action of nicotine upon the human heart, breathing, skin temperature, and blood pressure. The multiple graph indicates that this man's heart has not been visibly affected by the nicotine. The graph in the middle reproduces the pattern of breathing. We've seen that nicotine causes the heart to beat more rapidly and often irregularly. We've also seen that nicotine causes blood vessels to contract. There is a connection between the two. When the heart beats faster, it pumps more blood through the blood vessels, which nicotine has made narrower. As a result, blood pressure increases. Smoking is dangerous for persons suffering from disorders of blood vessels of the extremities, such as in the case of Berger's disease. To demonstrate the action of the autonomic ganglion cells of the intestines, we place a piece of rabbit intestine in a glass container. The rhythmic movement of the intestine continues even after dissociated from the animal. The scribe shows normal peristalsis. Now we inject nicotine into the solution. The reaction is violent. This is one reason why doctors often advise patients with peptic ulcers, chronic heartburn, or spastic intestines to abstain from smoking. Nicotine also acts upon the central nervous system. It stimulates it and produces a quickening of brain activity, which creates a feeling of nervousness and excitement. This rabbit reacts calmly to petting and tapping. But as soon as nicotine has acted upon it, the rabbit reacts to the same treatment with convulsions and tremor. Nicotine that enters the lungs of the smoker spreads rapidly through the body. In turn, it is excreted in urine, saliva, and sweat. After several days, all nicotine leaves the body, but the urge to smoke remains. This urge is the result of a complex set of causes, most of them psychological. Contrary to other habit-forming drugs, no bad after effects are known to result from giving up smoking. The question is then, why do people smoke?
It's sociable.
I never thought why I smoked.
I started smoking when I was quite young. My parents smoked, so do I.
Most people start smoking in imitation of a hero, or because they think that it makes them look important, grown up, or sophisticated, or they just stumble into the habit. But once formed, it is a hard habit to break. On the other hand, smoking is not an inborn, inherited, or natural urge. Beginners, almost without exception, find smoking irritating. Sometimes reactions are quite violent. And yet, smoking is a widespread social habit, so widespread that considerable money is spent on the study of its effects. What are the conclusions of research at this time? For one thing, there seems to be agreement that smoke causes irritation of air passages. A smoker's cough is a well-known sound. Of the many tar compounds in the tobacco smoke, we cannot tell with certainty which one or ones cause irritation. Our way of life makes it necessary for many people to live in air polluted with industrial smoke, dust, and car exhaust. Add to this the irritation of tobacco smoke, and draw your own conclusions. Experiments with mice are being conducted in several universities. Scientists suspect that certain constituents in the smoke, probably some of the tarry substances, may cause cancer in the respiratory tract, especially in the lungs of smokers. By smearing tars obtained from tobacco smoke and polluted city air on the skin of mice, scientists have already succeeded in inducing cancer in mice. Research in this area is relatively new. Observers also point at the high incidence of lip and tongue cancers found among pipe smokers. The increase in heart ailments in recent years alerted medical research to a closer observation of smoking habits of heart patients. There seems to be considerable agreement about the effect of smoking upon the human organism, but a great deal more work is needed to explain the potentially dangerous effects of smoke tars. Smoking is a widespread social habit, a habit very easily acquired, but very hard to break. Helped by advertising and glamorizing, it makes new converts easily, especially among the young. Armed with these facts, it must be the decision of each and every individual whether he or she will take the risks of smoking.
Hello and welcome back. Now that you've learned all about tobacco and the nasty effects it can have on your body, it's time for our last lesson here in How to Survive. And our next lesson, we will teach you all about cancer.
We in medical science are well. Cancer is one of the most deadly and elusive enemies faced by man. All too often, it is that goes untreated until at last, when it is found that cancer has been present for many months. Take the case of Bert Marshall.
From all indication of this X-ray and from other observations, he seems to be confined to the stomach.
Oh, what chance do I really have, Doctor?
Mr. Marshall, I have no desire to mislead you. I'm sure you realize that recovery is not a sure thing, but if we can go through surgery as quickly as possible, I believe you have a good chance of recovery.
Well, I appreciate your being so frank with me, Dr. Swanson. I guess I don't have to tell you how I feel.
I know how you feel, but this is the time for action rather than pity. You need to have the will to be cured. Beyond that, medical science will play its part. We've learned a great deal about cancer, but a great many questions go unanswered.
It was Hippocrates, the father of medicine, who in the 4th century BC first gave the name cancer to the malady. Cancer is known to affect most plants and animals. Cancer begins as a departure from normal cell growth that is harmful and unceasing. The rapidly growing abnormal cells usually differ sufficiently from normal ones to be recognizable under the microscope. Once cancerous cells appear, they soon develop into a clump of tissue that lives at the expense of the entire body. This tissue crowds and robs nourishment from other cells, tissues, or organs. If the abnormal cells grow slowly in a limited area, they are called benign tumors. If the cells in surrounding tissue or spread to other parts of the body, they constitute a malignant tumor, one that is cancerous. Cells of malignant growths may break off and travel through the bloodstream to other parts of the body. There, they may start new cancerous growths. In hospitals and elsewhere, progress is being made in the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. Special equipment, like the X-ray fluoroscope, helps identify and locate cancers. This is the kind of instrument used to make the photograph of Mr. Marshall's stomach cancer. With a gastroscope, the doctor can look inside a patient's stomach. In research laboratories, cancers are being induced in animals so that tests and treatments may be made upon them. But despite research and improved techniques of treatment, cancer remains man's #2 killer, second only to heart disease. Little wonder that a victim of cancer like Mr. Marshall feels depressed.
Don't worry, the doctor says. Yeah, it's easy to say when you're healthy. As for me, I might as well give up. I'm no good to myself or my family now. Doctor says that 1 out of 7 has a cancer at one time or another. That's a lot of people. Some of those folks are likely to be cancer victims now. Or possibly some of them have recovered from cancer. Yeah, but if they have recovered, they've probably discovered it earlier than I did. Oh, if only I'd gone to a doctor sooner.
Early treatment does give a higher percentage of cures. Why did Mr. Marshall wait so long?
Should have known something was wrong. That stomach distress and all. But I drifted along. Guess I was afraid to ask for medical advice. I listened to people who knew as little as I did.
Say, what's the matter with you anyway, Bert?
Oh, I don't know, Ken. It's that old stomach upset again.
Upset stomach? Why don't you take a little soda or a pill?
I don't know, Ken. I've had these pains a lot lately. You know, the other day I saw a program on TV about cancer. And one of the symptoms they mentioned is exactly the same thing I've gotten. You know, it really scares me.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Those fellows are always trying to talk people into going in to see a doctor. Go in for a checkup every year. Go in every time you get a mole on you or something. It's a lot of nonsense, this cancer business. Besides, this cancer's mostly for old people anyway. You know, I read some figures the other day that said that nobody gets cancer but old people.
I certainly shouldn't have paid attention to fellas like Ken. But I had to talk to someone, and well, I couldn't bring myself to tell the family my fears. It was only when I had a particularly bad attack that I finally went to the doctor. I remember how the doctor went into great detail with me about my past history and how he gave me a thorough examination that lasted through several visits.
We cancer specialists do make a thorough study of each patient's case. We know that many cancers can be treated successfully. Once the diagnosis is completed, using the different instruments and tests at our command, some form of therapy is begun. For some cases, X-ray treatment is an acceptable technique. The X-rays are focused on the cancerous tissue. X-rays help destroy cancerous cells. Only specially trained technicians should ever administer such treatments, because any large excess of X-rays may harm healthy cells as well as cancerous ones. When it is possible to operate, the removal of the cancer usually offers the most certain means of ridding the body of the cancerous growth. Cancer of the stomach can be removed surgically, so Dr. Swanson uses surgery on Mr. Marshall. In males, the digestive tract is most frequently afflicted with cancer. Other areas where cancer often strikes are the mouth, the respiratory tract, the skin, and the urinary system. In the female, cancers of the breast and the uterus are the most prevalent. But cancer of the digestive tract and the skin are also common. What causes cancerous growths to start? This is a question still largely unanswered, but a few facts are known. People exposed to the sun and wind a large part of the time, like farmers and sailors, have more skin cancers than those who are not exposed. Chronic irritation of a part of the body, like the lip or tongue, may lead to cancer. The hot stem of a pipe may be such an irritant. Certain chemicals have been known to cause cancer. Frequent exposure to X-rays or radioactivity without adequate protection is likely to develop cancers. Technicians and doctors wear protective clothing to avoid exposing themselves to X-rays when they are using such equipment. But for the average person, what are the symptoms? The danger signals of possible cancer. The common danger signals are easy to detect. Any sore that does not heal, a lump or thickening in the breast or elsewhere, unusual bleeding or discharge, any progressive change in the appearance of a wart or mole, persistent indigestion or difficulty in swallowing, persistent hoarseness or cough, or any change in normal bowel habits.
Yeah, you ought to be a very happy man, Mr. Marshall. As far as we can tell, your operation is a success. How do you feel?
Well, I feel pretty good, Doctor. I haven't any pain, and I'm mighty anxious to get home.
Well, you are feeling well. Wanting to go home. And don't you worry, you'll be there just as soon as possible.
There is something that does worry me, Doctor. As a matter of fact, Betty and I were just discussing it before you came in. Does my having cancer mean that Jimmy here will inherit it?
If that's all that's worrying you, put your mind at ease. Cancer isn't inherited. So just forget about any danger to Jimmy because of your trouble. Well, I've got other patients to see. I'll drop by tomorrow. Goodbye.
Thank you for coming, Doctor.
Severe distress finally led him to the doctor. But distress is often entirely absent in cancer cases. So the best protection is continual vigilance. Know the danger signals of cancer. Any sore that does not heal, a lump or thickening in the breast or elsewhere, unusual bleeding or discharge, any change in a wart or mole, persistent indigestion or difficulty in swallowing, persistent hoarseness or cough, any change in normal bowel habits. If you detect any of these danger signals, don't hesitate. Seek medical advice. We doctors are improving our techniques. No individual is alone in the fight against cancer. Research workers are finding and reporting more and more facts. The American Cancer Society, the press, radio, and television, all are helping contribute to a ending of cancer. What it is and how we will conquer cancer.
Hello and welcome back. Now that you've learned about cancer, tobacco, and all the other lessons that you need to survive, you should be able to, well, do just that, survive. I thank you for tuning in to this latest episode of How to Live. I'm your host, extraordinaire, educator, historian, and PhD Joe Gigliotti. I thank you for tuning in. Keep it simple. We'll see you next time.